On today's episode, we have our first Jonathan Toews update in quite a while, and it sounds like the three-time Stanley Cup champion could be hanging up the skates. I'll break down the recent report on Toews, and I'll also go over an outlook of the Blackhawks blue line for next season. All that and plenty more right here on Locked On Blackhawks.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? Welcome on in to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today is Wednesday, July 12th. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. As always, check me out on Twitter at Jack Bushman2. Go and show me some love if you can real quick. And you can also go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. And real quick, just a reminder that you could subscribe to the YouTube channel for 100% free if you haven't done so already. I know well over 50% of the viewers are not subscribed to the channel. What are you doing? It only takes 2 seconds. It won't cost you anything. It'll help me out tremendously. And also that way you can get the latest episode as soon as it gets uploaded to YouTube each and every day. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As always, thank you all for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. And thank you all for making the show your very first listen here to start off your day. And to kick things off here this morning, let's get into it real quick here. No need to waste any time. We have our first update on Jonathan Toews for the last little bit here. And of course, he and Patrick Kane hit the open market as unrestricted free agents for the first time in their historic and very, very successful NHL careers. For Patrick Kane, by the way, he did recently undergo hip surgery just about a month ago and seems to be progressing pretty well at this point. We've seen some videos uploaded on Instagram and other social media sites and whatnot. He's still a free agent at this point in time, and it sounds like there's no rush on him to make a decision. And for Jonathan Toews, though, really ever since, the end of the season in which he returned to the Blackhawks, I think for the final 8 games it was, of course, went on to score in his final game at the UC as a member of the team. But ever since then, we really haven't heard very much from Jonathan Toews, and there's been a lot of unknown surrounding the future for the now 35-year-old Captain Sirius. But that is up until today, because according to Mark Spector of SportsCenter, who is the past president of the PHWA, by the way, for those of you who might not know, he stated on Twitter back on July 7th that the CAA agency sent its list of free agents to NHL teams prior to July 1st. That's the agency that represents Jonathan Toews. And the list that they sent out excluded client Jonathan Toews. And according to Spector, it sounds like at this time, Jonathan Toews will not play next season. The final decision, of course, is yet to be made. There hasn't been any official announcement from Toews or anything on that front. But after doing some digging, I saw Tab Bamford, of Bleacher Nation Blackhawks, said that his sources confirmed that Toews was not a part of that list that was sent out prior to July 1st as well. And if that is in fact the case, it does seem pretty unlikely that the captain will be playing NHL hockey next season, which, going back to his presser at the end of the year, which really was the last time we heard anything from Jonathan Toews. As I mentioned, it's been a pretty quiet last few months for him. You could tell retirement was absolutely on his mind, and it was something that he was thinking about pretty seriously. And he mentioned, some of the stuff that he had to put to the side because of his playing career and how often he's been playing as well. I mean, think about all the postseason hockey, all the Olympic hockey, and all the times he was representing Canada. It was basically for 10 years there, like nonstop action for Jonathan Toews. Then obviously he's been dealing with chronic immune response syndrome and post-COVID, and that's been giving him issues. So we heard him say some of the things that he's had to put to the side definitely sound enticing. And while obviously we didn't get a decision one way or the other at that presser, it did certainly sound like Jonathan Toews was at least contemplating retirement. I'm not going to be going into a full Jonathan Toews tribute here on the show or anything. I've kind of gone through that multiple times as I've broken down the reports here on Locked On Blackhawks. Most of them haven't really contained anything too groundbreaking, but this is really the first one that gives a truthful indication that Jonathan Toews may be hanging it up. If it does wind up being true, if this report from Mark Spector winds up being accurate, that Toews isn't going to be playing next season, I'll obviously be doing a huge ceremony and a huge tribute to the captain for everything he did for this organization and for the city of Chicago. But man, it would just be such a sad ending to just a tremendous career for Jonathan Toews. And the competitor that he is, how fiery of a player he always was. I mean, this is probably killing him, that, his body just isn't cooperating at this point in time. And look, going back to the beginning of last season, right out of the gate, I think the Blackhawks were 6-4-0 in their first 10 games. And Jonathan Toews, I think, had 8 goals in the first 11 games of the year. I mean, he came out roaring and was still, the NHL leader in faceoff percentage, didn't miss a beat there. Things kind of, derailed there at the end as his body started to give out towards the All-Star break. But in that first half, Jonathan Toews showed that he could still get the job done. And I'm sure in his mind, he feels like he can still make an impact all over the ice. But if his body is, not giving him anything to cooperate with, it's hard to argue with that. And, the mind and the will can only take you so far. But for Jonathan Toews, there really isn't anything that he could do if his body is just kind of telling him that it's time. It almost feels like another Marian Hossa situation all over again, right? Like, you feel like the guy could still make an impact at the highest level. I think Marian Hossa in his final season potted 27 goals, right? Like, you feel like these guys still have what it takes to play the game at the high level, but their bodies just at a certain point won't agree with the grueling grind that it takes to be a professional hockey player. Again, we don't have anything official from Jonathan Toews at this point in time, but this was, again, really the first sign that it could be the end of a historic career for a surefire Hall of Famer, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, of course, 2010 Conn Smyth Trophy winner, 2 Olympic gold medals, a World Juniors gold medal, a World Championship gold medal, the youngest player to be in the what's it called? The Triple Gold Club, winning the World Juniors, winning the World Championships, winning a Stanley Cup, Selke Trophy winner. I mean, you name it, Jonathan Toews achieved it in his professional hockey career. It's sad if this is the ending. It's the ending that no one wanted to see for Jonathan Toews. But if this does wind up being it for him, man, what an honor it's been to watch Captain Sirius play his entire NHL career for the Chicago Blackhawks. And the city, I don't think, could ever thank him enough for everything he did in his 15 or 16 years with the organization. All right, there are some thoughts on Jonathan Toews reportedly not being expected to play next season. Coming up in just a moment, I will take a look back at the matching 8-year deals that Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews signed nearly 9 years ago from today. But first, I need to talk to you all about FanDuel. Make a home run trot over to FanDuel as baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon, place your first bet, and you'll get up to $2,500 back in bonus bets if your bet doesn't win. And I've been riding hot with fading the Kansas City Royals. I was almost going to say the Kansas City Chiefs. Fading the Kansas City Royals, also hit the National League to win their first All-Star game in seemingly ages, won it all on FanDuel. And you don't want to miss out on your opportunity to get a no-sweat first bet, again, up to $2,500 when you join FanDuel today. You just got to go to FanDuel.com/lockedon in order to sign up. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, we're back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, if you haven't done so already, please make sure that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. I'm really trying to grow the show, really trying to boost those numbers up right now. And if you're subscribed to the channel and following Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram, you'll have a chance to win some cool free Blackhawks stuff with the giveaway that I'm currently having. I'm giving away some really cool Blackhawks items. You can check out pictures of them by following Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram. Just follow that account, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and real quick, DM Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram a screenshot that shows you're subscribed to the channel, and you could be the lucky winner and could take home some cool free Blackhawks stuff. All right, segment 2. With these reports surfacing around Jonathan Toews here in the last couple of days, I thought it would be fun to kind of take a look back to reflect on simpler times, the sweeter days of the Chicago Blackhawks. Nearly 9 years ago from today, just a few days ago, Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews in 2014 signed matching 8-year, $84 million contracts. And at that time, of course, the Blackhawks were in their heyday. They had just won 2 Stanley Cups in 4 years, 2010 and 2013. Both Kane and Toews were absolutely at their peak. They were at their prime. Both of them were, under, I think, 28 years old and had already, under 28, probably even younger than that. And both had already won Conn Smyth, multi-time Stanley Cup champions. Obviously were the forefront of the Blackhawks' resurgence, becoming alive again as a franchise, becoming realistic contenders, and becoming a modern-day dynasty. And it was also in the summer of 2014. It was time to pay them for everything that they had done. And this is kind of something that doesn't get remembered, and it's actually something that I kind of had to go back and look at because I was a little bit young at that time. But Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane, I don't want to say were grossly underpaid, but they were pretty underpaid for being, 2-time Stanley Cup champions at their age and for what they had accomplished and for becoming, they didn't hit the open market, but they were a year away from hitting the open market at the prime of their careers. It was kind of time to buck up and shell out an empty check for whatever they wanted. And I know there are some Blackhawks fans out there who felt like this was kind of the start of the demise for the Blackhawks dynasty, because once you pay Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane the big bucks, along with Brent Seabrook's contract, everything that went into it, right? That's kind of the salary cap issues that came to the forefront and really led to the Blackhawks having to make multiple changes and bouncing players in and out. Artemi Panarin obviously is one that stands out in everyone's minds. But at that same point in time, what did you want the Blackhawks front office to do otherwise? Because if they weren't going to buck up and pay Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane whatever they wanted, if the Blackhawks weren't going to make them the highest paid players in the league at that time, the highest paid players in the salary cap era, someone else absolutely was going to. Because look, for what they did at their age, for how they were able to always make an impact on the biggest stages and were really the center stage, the ones leading the charge for the Chicago Blackhawks, someone else was going to shell out and pay them top dollar. And I know some people feel like, and it's probably very few people if I'm being honest, because no one was really upset with those contracts when they were signed. No one had a gripe about them whatsoever, because Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane were beloved in Chicago. And when they signed that deal, it felt like it was making them Blackhawks for life. Everyone was happy. So hindsight's always 2020. It's always how it works with financials in sports. But I don't think how you could really make an argument that these were bad deals given out. Some folks will say, well, Jonathan Toews didn't really live up to his end of the bargain in those last few years of that contract. I think that's pretty largely unfair, considering how big of an impact Jonathan Toews was making as a two-way player, and also his leadership abilities on and off the ice, which I know some people debate and think it's overrated. I don't understand that. For everything that he came with and for how big of a two-way center that he was, the best in the game, truthfully, I don't think you could say that he was overpaid. And also, obviously, you have to consider the chronic immune response syndrome slowing down his offensive production. But when he was healthy these last few years, he had some of his best offensive seasons, a really strong first half this past year, like I mentioned. I think it's a little bit unfair to say Jonathan Toews didn't live up to his end of the bargain. Patrick Kane, I think, undoubtedly did, still proving to be quite a productive player, and like a fine wine, is only getting better with age. Probably going to return back to that level after getting hip surgery. I don't think you could say that neither of them were worth the money. These were absolutely two deserving players that deserve to be the highest paid players in the league. And looking back at these deals, I think it's a really cool memento and something we'll look at for a while. And just I think it's really special that we were able to pay them the exact same amount, to sign them to matching 8-year deals and to have them kind of play out the same 10 years. I know they both ended differently, but it almost feels like a little bit of a fairy tale ending to me. And again, I know people will say that Patrick Kane was the only one who was kind of worth that dollar amount at the end of the day, but I think it's also synonymous to the Blackhawks achieving everything they did and how it all started. It started with Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews together. That's really what changed everything, was drafting Toews third, drafting Patrick Kane first overall. Those two, not just one of those two are what led the Blackhawks to glory. They absolutely wouldn't have won 3 Stanley Cups with just Jonathan Toews. They would not have won 3 Stanley Cups with just Patrick Kane. They needed them both to lead this resurgence of the Blackhawks organization. And they're both surefire Hall of Famers and two of the best to ever do it in the Blackhawks sweater, undoubtedly. So, in my opinion, to have signed them to matching deals 9 years ago, nearly today, back in 2014, for them to basically have the same 10 years, I think it's pretty special and kind of synonymous to how they're always going to be remembered here in the city of Chicago, and that's together. All right, coming up in just a moment, don't go anywhere, Blackhawks fans. I totally just spit everywhere. I don't know if anyone saw that, but don't go anywhere, Blackhawks fans, as I still have to get into a blue line outlook for the 2023-2024 campaign. All right, before I wrap things up on the show today, I do want to let you all know about the cool stuff that I have planned for Locked On Blackhawks here in the next few weeks. Of course, make sure to go and subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube and follow Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram to take part in the giveaway that I'm currently having. Be sure to DM Locked On Blackhawks on Instagram as well. Just a quick little screenshot that shows you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. But as far as videos go, I will be having a couple of crossovers with fellow Locked On hosts coming out in the next few weeks. I'm also going to start taking a dive into all of the Central Division teams and see how they are shaping up heading into the season. And I'll also be having a full projection for Connor Bedard's rookie season here in Chicago. Make sure you're subscribed to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube so you don't miss out on any of that good stuff. All right, before I wrap things up today, segment 3, I do want to mention that Ian Mitchell, former second-round pick for the Chicago Blackhawks in the 2017 NHL draft, a very highly touted prospect, of course, during the Stan Bowman era. Unfortunate and disappointing end to his tenure here in Chicago, though, recently, as he was dealt to the Boston Bruins a few weeks ago, along with defenseman Alec Regula in exchange for Nick Foligno and Taylor Hall, a deal that looks very good for general manager Kyle Davidson as he continues to stay winning. That's our general manager, baby. But I did want to be sure to mention that, both Ian Mitchell and Alec Regula were pending restricted free agent defensemen, and both of them will need new deals to be members of the Boston Bruins for next season. And it sounds like the Bees and Ian Mitchell reached agreement recently to avoid arbitration. We heard Elliot Friedman report on Twitter. Taking a look at the old Twitter, there's a lot of notifications right now. Okay. Just want to see if there was anything more on the Jonathan Toews front, as it's kind of caught some steam here today. But we did hear from Elliot Friedman on Twitter recently that Mitchell and the Bruins have agreed upon a 1-year, $775,000 deal, and it appears that it's a one-way deal at this point in time as well. That would mean, of course, that Mitchell would have to clear waivers in order to be sent down to the AHL level. But it's a really interesting opportunity for Mitchell here in Boston, moving on to his second NHL club. And it feels like a good situation for him, considering that Jim Montgomery is the head coach of the Boston Bruins, of course. And Mitchell spent time with him when Montgomery was the head coach of the University of Denver Pioneers for a couple of years there as well. So it's probably going to be a comfortable spot for Mitchell to join in on. But I'm curious to see whether or not he's going to be making the opening night roster out of camp, because on the blue line for the Bruins on the right side, they of course have Charlie McAvoy and Brandon Carlo, but they also have Kevin Shattenkirk and Jakub Zaboral. Is that his first name? I know they have Zaboral, who can play the right side as well. So it looks like Mitchell might need to have himself a pretty solid outing in training camp in order to make the Bruins opening night roster. And if he doesn't, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not another team would claim him off of waivers. But with Mitchell, reaching that agreement with the Boston Bruins, I felt like it was kind of an easy transition, an easy time for me to take a look at the Blackhawks blue line outlook for the upcoming 2023-2024 season. I kind of broke down the forward group a few days ago on the show. You can go and check that out on the YouTube channel if you want to hear more about that. But it really feels like the Blackhawks roster has taken its shape for the upcoming season, right? There's not going to be any more additions to the forward group. I fully believe that. And as I kind of parse through these defensemen, you'll see it feels like the only addition that the Blackhawks have left to make is adding another right-handed defenseman. But getting into how things are shaking out for the Blackhawks at this point in time, I'll start on the right side because it's a little more clear-cut and dry at this point in the summer. Seth Jones obviously shapes up to be the top pairing right-handed defenseman. That sets up Connor Murphy to fit in nicely as the second pairing right-handed defenseman. And then interestingly enough, the Blackhawks did not buy out Nikita Zaitsev here in the offseason. Maybe they wanted his salary kind of to help them reach the floor there, but kind of an interesting choice. But it seems like Zaitsev is probably going to be in the opening night lineup for the Blackhawks on their third pairing because other than him, at this point in time, the Blackhawks don't have another right-handed defenseman in the system. Now, we did hear that recently from Rockford IceHogs head coach Anders Sorensen that Nolan Allen, 2021 first-round pick, big left-handed defenseman, could be moving over to the right-hand side, something he's done a little bit in his junior career to kind of help give some depth in that side. And also same with Wyatt Kaiser. He might be getting some looks on the right side, but I think it's pretty clear cut without another guy. Louis Crevier is not going to be ready to play in the NHL out of camp. That would be a massive surprise. So it seems pretty cut and dry that Jones, Murphy, and Zaitsev will be the right-handed defenseman for the Blackhawks on opening night. The left side is where it gets really interesting because the Blackhawks have Alex Vlasic, Isaac Phillips, Wyatt Kaiser, and Jared Tenorti. And by the way, go and comment down below your opinion as to which of those three, and I'll throw Kevin Korchinski in there as well, who's a very curious case, and there's a lot of up in the air about whether or not he's going to be on the Blackhawks opening night roster. It sounds like they're going to be giving him that opportunity, but out of those four, Vlasic, Phillips, Kaiser, and Korchinski, go and comment down below your prediction as to which ones are in the lineup for the Blackhawks on opening night against the Pittsburgh Penguins. The way that I personally see it, I think Alex Vlasic is, in my opinion, a lock to be on that top pairing with Seth Jones to open up the year. I think that's a very natural spot for him to kind of start off his first full NHL campaign. I also thought from what I saw out of Isaac Phillips at the end of the year in that NHL stint of his, really looked like he could have been an NHLer if the Blackhawks were actually trying to win games. I don't think he has much to prove left at the AHL level. I think a good starting spot for him would be on the second defensive pairing next to Connor Murphy. Wyatt Kaiser is the interesting one to me because I don't remember who said it. It might have been Scott Powers, but there was some statement made by one of the Blackhawks beat writers that sure made it sound like the Blackhawks expected Wyatt Kaiser to be NHL ready to open up the season. Now, quite honestly, I think it was good to give him some experience towards the end of last year, but I didn't quite think that he was 100% ready. And he absolutely has to get stronger and get a little tougher in order to handle things in his own zone defensively. Even though he is an offensive-minded guy, still going to have to shore up that side of his game a little bit. And I really do think it's just a good opportunity for him to go down in Rockford, kind of like we saw out of Vlasic and Phillips last season. There's really no rush. I think Rockford makes sense for Wyatt Kaiser, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens if he gets that opportunity out of the gate. If Wyatt Kaiser is in the AHL to open up the year, here's where things get interesting because theoretically that could open up a spot for Kevin Korchinski if the Blackhawks think he's NHL ready right out of the gate. And I know burning the first year of his entry-level contract also could come into effect. He could play, 9-10 games for the Blackhawks and they send him back to junior. It's going to be really, actually, I don't think they can do that. I don't know why I said that. It's going to be really, really interesting to see how I think they can. Now I'm confusing myself. Anyways, regardless, it's going to be really fascinating to see how they handle Kevin Korchinski. You also got to consider Jared Tenorti, who signed a one-year deal towards the end of last year. he could be getting that spot on that third defensive pairing, or maybe even up a spot with Connor Murphy, as those two played a lot together this past season. And I think Philip Ruse, it's worth throwing his name out there too, because a little bit of a tweener in terms of his age, right? Like, he's got some professional experience from over in Europe before he signed on with the Blackhawks last season. They gave him an opportunity early on in the year, and he never really came back up. But he's kind of a guy, unlike Isaac Phillips, Wyatt Kaiser, or an Alex Vlasic. I think the Blackhawks would be okay with healthy scratching Philip Ruse, considering his age compared to the rest of these guys. You don't want to be scratching Alex Vlasic, Isaac Phillips, or Wyatt Kaiser regularly. You'd rather have them playing every day in Rockford than sitting up in the press box. Now, there are some nights where it's okay to learn from the press box. You just don't want to be doing it on a regular basis. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how the left side for the Blackhawks kind of shapes out in training camp, because there's not a whole lot of jobs open, and there's, 4 or 5 guys who are really going to be pushing for it. So I think it's going to be an intriguing battle to keep an eye on throughout training camp. But as far as the right side goes, it's pretty obvious that, this is the one area where the Blackhawks need to make an addition, whether that's going to be through free agency or through waivers like we saw last year with Tenorti. That's to be determined, but do anticipate the Blackhawks adding one more right-handed defenseman, probably on a 2-way deal. I know they just signed Josh Maniscalco the other day, right-handed defenseman, but he's kind of a career ECHLer, probably just a depth add for Rockford and for Indy. So the one last addition I think the Blackhawks have to make here in the offseason or in training camp is adding another right-handed defenseman. They're pretty deep on the left side, but undoubtedly thin on the right. I think that's the last order of business, other than Philip Kurashev left here in the offseason. All right, folks, I think that's going to wrap up Wednesday, July 12th episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you all again for tuning into the show, and make sure to go and subscribe to the YouTube channel and to go and follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may be listening to your podcast. And that way you could get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Go and follow me on Twitter at Jack Bushman 2. I would greatly appreciate all the love. You could also go and follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until tomorrow's episode, I think that's going to do it here for the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.